All right. Praise the Lord. Thank you, David. So I want to welcome you guys here. Thank you for coming. And you have come to Epic Fail, Was Darwin Wrong? And tonight's presentation is geology. Lots of, is it time or water that comes first? Lots of water, lots of time, right? So which one is it? So we can kind of look at that, or is it both? So that's what we're excited to present to you tonight. And I'm Parnell Mahoney, pastor of Maranatha Church. And this event was sponsored by our church, plus two student groups, International Student Outreach and Maranatha Christian Fellowship. And yep, a little bit about our information table over here. We have another event. This is the third event in a series. And we have another event, another presentation tomorrow night at our campus church. So if you are interested and don't know the details, grab a flyer on the information on that. You're welcome to come. That's 7 to 9, just near campus here. A couple about, on the bus route on the edge of Dinkytown. And we have a sign-up sheet if you're interested in hearing about our future events and our other interesting information on the table, our church flyers for worship. And we do have weekly Bible studies. So if that's something you want to find community and get in the Word of God, we have something called a dinner Bible fellowship, which is available. So you can sign up and indicate in your comments if you're interested in that. So praise God. So why are we doing this presentation? Well, I want to share my personal story. I didn't grow up in a Christian home, and I believed in God, but didn't know if he existed. He was kind of my lucky rabbit's foot. And so I came to school, and when I was a junior, met somebody that started asking me some questions about faith. And I thought, I am kind of curious. So I started meeting with this person, and I started getting awakened to like the possibility, like, wow, this message about Jesus Christ is amazing. This guy taught and did amazing things. And I'm pretty excited to, about this, but I don't know if it's true. Gave me hope. I was pretty lost. I was pretty lonely, pretty dealing with anxiety, depression. I was like, this sounds like a solid rock I could stand on, and but I wasn't looking for a crutch. It just looked like gave me hope. And anyway, I met Christ in my room one night. I'm like, in my apartment on campus, and I didn't see him, but I met him. I know he was there, and I kind of had an encounter with God and confessed my sins and surrendered to him as Lord and Savior. Asked him to save me from hell, because after I confessed my sins, I felt like the ground was going to open up and I was going to go down to the place that I deserved. And because after confessing my sins, I just realized how much bad I had done and what was in my heart. But then he showed me what he did for me. So I accepted him, and he came into my life and saved me. And my life changed after that. I didn't really know what happened that night. It was kind of a religious experience. The next morning I woke up, I don't remember, hey, I became a Christian last night. No, I just went about my business because it was just kind of an emotional response to the encounter with God. But my life changed. Jesus promised he'd give us the Holy Spirit. And the Spirit came into my life. I was born again. And suddenly I could hear God's voice inside. My heart was changed. My motivations were changed. The world became new. Everything became different. The Bible became different. And so I thought to myself, wow, this Jesus he is who he said he is. He did what he said he would do. And now I'm going to believe the whole Bible because of this encounter with God. It's like, if through believing the words of Jesus, I encountered him, he came into my life. Now I'm going to believe the whole Bible. So I went to Genesis, reading Genesis, and I had a conflict. I'm like, okay, wow, God created the world in 6 days. God flooded the world. Like all these things happen, but where does evolution fit in? And so I, at some point, decided I'm going to switch over. I'm not going to believe in macroevolution or mega evolution anymore, this molecules to man evolution. I'm going to believe in the account that God gave me in the Bible about how he did it. And so then I said, God, where's the scientific evidence? I would like to have, I believe the Bible, but I'd like to have some additional material, because I'm in college and conversations are not easy, with people that are skeptical. So that's when we met people like the Nuttings, and that was amazing to me. We've been bringing them in a long time. They're our speakers tonight, and I think you'll be very amazed at the things that you're going to see tonight. Pretty powerful stuff. And so we believe as Christians that the Bible is revealed history, that it tells us our real past, your real past, like everybody's. And as Christians, our faith rests on the fact that the message is historic, especially in particular, obviously, the message of Jesus Christ, that he was a real man, that he really lived a sinless life, that he really did all these things, all these miracles, and that he really died on a Roman cross for our sins, that he really rose from the dead, proving that he conquered sin and death, and that God accepted his payment for our sin, and that we can have eternal life through faith in him. That we believe that's historic, that really happens, real events. We have evidence for that being historic, but since the point of bringing that up is this verse. It says in 1 Corinthians 15:17, part of the verse says, if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile. So basically, as Christians, we put it all on the line. We say either this thing is historic, or we might as well be atheists or join some other religion that is historic or something. Like, let's not believe something that's a fairy tale, right? And I'll go back to the bar if I'm believing a fairy tale, So the Bible record of history tells us about creation, the fall, how man fell, the flood of the world, like I said, the cross of Christ, faith in him and salvation, relationship with God forever. And we just figure that if he can't get the first book of the Bible right, how can we trust him to get the rest correct? And so we don't think that, I don't know, for me, Genesis many of us, we're convinced Genesis comes across as literal, that it's not meant to be legendary. It's not meant to be figurative when it tells us about 6 days creation and all these things. So we find a lot of Christians struggle with this conflict between evolution and a literal the literal creation account from Scripture, and so many of them walk away from the faith because they just can't. They figure, well, if God is all-knowing, how could he have said this matter of fact and then it's not true? Some people hold on to their faith and stay as Christians and just accept evolution. We don't look down on them, but we just think that you don't have to have that struggle, that you can believe the creation account, and there's science to back it up. So we're excited to present that to you in the area of geology tonight. The presentation is an hour and 15 minutes.
I can might do it in an hour and 5.
Okay, no pressure. After the presentation tonight by Dave Nutting, then we're gonna have a Q&A. So if you have questions, please ask them at that time. And a little bit about Dave and Mary Jo Nutting, our speakers tonight. They are from, Dave is from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but grew up in Grand Junction, Colorado, which is where you guys live now. Mary Jo's from Mankato, Minnesota. And Dave's an avid fly fisherman. Both of them like hiking. Mary Jo loves spending time with her grandkids. And they are founders and directors of the Alpha Omega Institute. And they've been teaching creation science for 40 years. They used to be evolutionists, and they studied the scientific evidence and became convinced of creation. Dave didn't grow up in a Christian home, right?
I didn't.
Mary Jo did. She was a theistic evolutionist until she, through studying some of the science, she transitioned out of that, and then Dave became a Christian and was still an evolutionist, then transitioned out of that. But yeah, they have advanced degrees, Dave in mathematics and geology, Mary Jo in biology with a science education emphasis. And they both taught at the high school and college level. They both taught evolution and other subjects. And we're excited to hear about the presentation tonight. So please welcome Dave Nutting.
Great. All right, thank you much. Well, I have a similar story to his, but I'm not going to talk about it too much tonight, except for one thing. When I was in my 3rd year of college, I ended up having people like Parnell come to me and present the gospel. Clear back then, man, they asked me if I wanted to turn my life over, and I said, absolutely not. Get out of here. Threw them out of my dorm room, basically. And those guys probably thought, boy, that guy is hard. He'll never come to the Lord. And after they left, I thought about it. And I said, I better think about this a little bit more. All right, I better do it. I put up one of those parachute prayers. You know what that is, right? Just in case, just an in case prayer. All right. And the next night, God talked to me basically, and I became serious about this. I said, I need this basically for me. All right, for me. And my life was going this way and slowly went around, made a U-turn slowly. Okay. And, but when I became a believer in the Lord Jesus Christ, I just drug evolution right along with me. I did. I thought that was a proven fact. Okay. I thought it was a proven fact, evolution. And so I just grabbed a hold of it and went with it. And that means at that point, there's a lot of the stuff in the Bible that I thought were good stories, right? And so just basically didn't pay much attention to that. And so I was happy in my evolution. I thought it was true until Mary Jo found a book in a secondhand bookstore for 5 cents. And that started us doing some thinking. It was Evolution, The Fossils Say No by Dr. Duane Gish. Now, Duane Gish was known as a real debater on the creation versus evolution. He was from Berkeley, University of Berkeley, in biochemistry, I think was his field. And he was he started debating, but we got a hold of his book and thought, wow, that guy's nuts not to believe in evolution. That's what I originally thought. He had to be. But then as I read his book, he said, he's either nuts or he's got a good point. We better start doing our own research instead of accepting everything that I had been taught all of those years. Okay? And you might say the more research both of us did, the more we evolved from evolutionists to creationists. Okay? And so Daryl Ayers over here brought in a couple of DVDs. These are ancient. I mean, we ought to sell these as antiques. All right, I'm going to auction them off here in a minute. No, actually, these are debates: creation versus evolution with Duane Gish versus Sam Kirkwood. That was right here at the University of Minnesota, 1977. All right. And what do you want me to do with these, Daryl? Hey.
I'll take one.
All right. Hey, all right now, here we go. What are you going to bid for?
I don't think I have a DVD player.
All right. There's one.
You leave one on the table if you want.
Okay, somebody grab them before you leave here
I'll
tonight.
leave them both on the table if you want it, otherwise I'll take one.
We'll see. I think we can get more from Daryl, perhaps, if you want more. Okay, we figure that one out. Okay. Anyhow, we're going to be talking about a lot of water, geology, a lot of water or a lot of time. Which is it, huh? Is there really such a thing as a flood? Oh, come on now. I can remember being at the Colorado School of Mines given a creation program. I said nothing about a flood. Somebody from the back of the auditorium, I can see him practicing toward the question and answer time, raising it. He was practicing. And I said, any question? Boom, up his hand went, right? He said, you don't believe in the flood, do you? I said, sure, don't you? He said, well, how did Noah get all those stinking animals on board that little tiny boat? I asked him a question. How big was the boat? All right. How big was that boat? I guess I'm going to use that for right now. And he said, well, I don't know. I never calculated how big it was. Okay, well, could you at least tell me how many animals had to go on board that boat? He said, well, I haven't calculated that either. I haven't looked into it. And basically what he was trying to tell me is that an unknown number of animals can't fit on board a boat of unknown size. So he suffered from this particular type of cartoon, thinking it's a little tiny boat with all the animals kind of squeezing on, right? We hear that all the time. And Now, that boat was bigger. I just want to let you know that answers the question how those animals could fit. And that boat was at least 1.5 to 2 football fields in length. If you use the biblical dimension that was given in the Bible, wow. And there was a book written by John Wood Morape. He took all of the major things about the flood and said objections. And he said, how do you do the manure cleanup? How do you do this? How do 8 people be able to handle all that animal stuff? And basically, what do you do with certain type of vegetation? What do you, ooh. Anyhow, he did his research. And then at the end of his book, there are 70 pages of references to technical journals and things like that, showing how it was feasible. Noah's Ark, a feasibility study, okay? Well, it turns out that the flood is one of the most documented events in the biblical record, okay? It is 3 whole chapters devoted to that. And then all throughout the rest of the scripture, different writers also refer to that flood as genuine, okay? And so what do you do with that then, okay? And so even Jesus Christ himself referred to it as a reality. All right, now, but it wasn't just a biblical record. You look in different archaeological finds, you find there's a cuneiform tablet and with a flood description. You find several Babylonian documents, again, similar type of flood. You've got the Sumerian kings list, names kings who reigned for long periods of time. Then a great flood came. And then the Sumerian kings did not live as long, okay? It didn't reign. Some people say, yeah, but the Sumerian kings list talks about people being 10,000 years old. Well, it turns out the Sumerians, when you actually do the research on it, had 2 different types of numbering systems. And if you convert, like say base 10 to base 2, that looks like a big number, right? From a, yeah. And so basically what you have is when you convert the base that they were utilizing to base 10, it's the same ages as the biblical patriarchs. All right, same basic age. And so we look at that and say, people did live long ages before the flood. But then something happened at the time of the flood, which caused their lifespans to go down, 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 down. Today, if you live to be 100, you're doing really good, right? You're doing great. All right, so this doesn't substantiate the biblical record. Oh, you say, what about that guy down there? This guy. He didn't live that long. Well, guess what? His name is Enoch. If you read the biblical record, you find out he didn't die. God took him directly, okay, according to what the scripture says. And anyhow, so we look at all that and we say, okay, what's going on there? Something happened at the time of the flood in order to change the whole living, you might say, lifespans, the whole lifespans, etc. We have theories, but we're not going to get into that today. We have the Babylonian clay cuneiform. Maybe they said the Bible was borrowed from this because of its parallels to the biblical account. We've got the, not only that, we have the Gilgamesh epic. Animals taken on board the ark, birds sent out during the flood, ark landing on a mountain, sacrifice offered. So people say, hey, that sounds a lot like the biblical record. So maybe the Bible was borrowed from the Gilgamesh epic. Well, it turns out, I believe all of these other accounts were borrowed from the biblical record. And my thinking about it is that Noah, during the time was the flood, was actually writing this down. I call the count given in the record, in the biblical record, as Noah's ship log. You're writing it down as it happens. All right. And then it's now incorporated into what is now called the books of Moses. Okay. And so I believe that's what's probably happened. Well, the Gilgamesh epic has or the Gilgamesh account has an ark shaped like a cube. Some of the other ones have them shaped like a tin can. I would not want to be in that thing on high sea waters. Okay. The waves, I get really seasick. Right. Yeah. Was there really a flood? Do you understand there are 270 flood legends from all around the world? So many different common traits, like an ark, like animals going on board, human seed being saved, all kinds of stuff, all pointing to the fact that they had some record of it. Now, as they dispersed around the globe, after, say, the Tower of Babel, after they do that, they're taking those records with them, whether they be mental or whatever, and now they're telling it in their own culture. So the different cultures around the world may have a boat, but it's going to be like they know from their culture, correct? The Toltec is pretty close to what the biblical shape of the ark is, okay? Which is perfect for riding out rough seas. All right, Noah's ship log. This is the one account, and the reason I believe this account is valid is because of its specific detail. Is Noah's flood myth? How do myths and legends normally start? Once upon a time, in a far distant land, so-and-so happened, right? No, look at this. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, whoo, that's specific. We know exactly when this flood starts, okay? On the same day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open and the floodgates of the sky were open. So we actually notice that detail, but the detail also includes there were two different sources for the water. Two sources in what we're looking at. And as we go along in the biblical record, it actually states what happens in various times of the flood. That's why I say it looks like Noah is writing this down. What's going on? What does he see? And then we find out finally in the second year, the second month, on the 27th day of the month, he's instructed by God, it's time to leave the ark. So Noah was on that boat, looks like 371 days. Okay, roughly 371 days. And besides that, you look at the biblical record, you find out it was not just a little bit of rain at all. Okay, the whole fountains of the great deep opened up. What does that mean? We're not quite sure. Okay, we're not quite sure what that actually meant. But we find out that there could have been huge geysers like we have. Think about a geyser that's like Old Faithful, but now do it for about 1,000 miles. Okay, you understand the type of what we're looking at is potentially what the fountains of the great deep opening up was all about. This whole event, as described in the Bible, is not some local little flood. It is worldwide, wide in extent, okay? Worldwide. It's like taking a basketball, putting it into a swimming pool. That's the biblical record here. Okay, why would I even say that? Why? If it's a local event, why build a huge ark? Why do that? You know, just herd the animals around over here someplace. Yeah. The whole language in the Bible, all flesh perish from under heaven. That was not on board that ark, or of course could live in the waters. Okay, that's pretty inclusive, under heaven. Why take birds on a boat if it's a local flood? They'd be better off just flying around, right? Flying around, moving around, different areas, okay? The water covers the tops of the tallest mountains. And here's something I get all the time. Well, we don't have enough water to cover the top of Mount Everest. This can't be right. This is myth. But we do notice something about even Mount Everest, the top of the tallest mountain. That has strata on it that's called sedimentary in geology. That means it was put down by water. And they contained fossils of creatures which once swam in the ocean. Okay? Now, that does not prove a flood, incidentally. Okay, it might be circumstantial evidence, but it just tells me that that mountain was underwater at one time. Of course, standard geology, what I always had followed for years and years and years as a geologist, would have told me that those certain pressure in the earth caused these plate tectonics pushing up these mountains gradually over several 100 million years. And so that would be their answer. Possible? Yeah, that's why I say it's circumstantial. Either side would have an answer for that particular one. The duration of the flood, a local flood comes, goes just like that, doesn't it? This one, Noah's on that boat for 371 days. And so that's something much bigger. And God said, I'll never send a flood like that again. And if it was a local flood, he didn't keep his promise. God always keeps his promise, doesn't he, Purnell? Okay, yeah. The rainbow. We've had so many local floods. Think about the different tsunamis they've had when you have different plates all of a sudden shifting, sending a tsunami inland. So anyhow, yeah, we've had plenty of local floods, but this one was a worldwide one. I see that there. And then there's much geologic evidence worldwide for that flood as well. So when I look at rock layers and canyons, I see a different picture than what I used to see, back in my college days. I see a very different picture. I see a picture of catastrophic flooding. Now, you say, what? Yeah. When you look at geologic layers, when you look closely, you can see a different thing showing up. Let me illustrate this by this picture right here. Who are you looking at? Who's that? Ah, you got it. Marilyn Monroe. Pretty sure of that, right? Yep. Okay, let's just zoom the picture in and let's see what Marilyn looks like close up. Okay. I did not trick you. I didn't. All I did was blow up that picture, huh? That's it. Yep. Anyhow. So what are you seeing? The closer you look at the evidence, sometimes you see a different picture. You see something else emerging, don't you? And same thing when you look at geologic formations. Well, I've looked at ridges like this in Southern California, and I was taught that represents close to 100 million years of geologic history. But wait a minute, let's look a little closer. You see those big boulders? Those boulders are water-worn and cracked across the face. They've been tumbled by a major catastrophic water flow. And in fact, that whole 600 feet of mountain is all made up of water-worn boulders. I love it. If you drive with me, I'll point out to the field and say, boulders, look at that. But I see these all over now. These great big water-worn boulders, some of them the size of a dump truck. What does that show you? That ridge was not put down over 100 million years. This is a catastrophic event with a lot of deep current, high velocity, deep currents moving those boulders. That's the only way you're going to get it. Here's Split Mountain, California. You see some of those boulders and those layers up there? Some of them are half the size of the Jeep. So what do we see? High velocity, pulsating currents, separated by a little bit calmer currents putting down the little material or small material in between. When you see that, you're talking about pulsating currents during a time of catastrophic flooding. So I see evidence of flooding in those layers, not 100 million years. Here's another spot. You see the water-worn boulder material working its way like a fist into a layer cake onto the layers on your right. Here's another instance where the sandstone layers were considered to be somewhere close to 100 million years of deposition. The sandstone layers. But wait a minute, that material arriving from the left, punching its way in there. Notice how the layers kind of bend up this way and bend down that way. That had to have still been soft for that to occur. Now, it only takes hundreds of years, maybe 1,000 years to turn that type of sandstone, because of the chemistry, into solid cement rock. That means that 100 million years could not have happened. Wow. All right. Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980. That was a gorgeous spot to live and have a good vacation. All right. And think about it. You see sailboats out there on Spirit Lake. But then the mountain took up a bad habit, began to smoke. It's not good when mountains smoke. Bad enough when I smoke, okay? All right. But anyhow, yeah. But they noticed craters began to develop on the mountain. Cracks began to develop. Then they noticed that this mountain is beginning to bulge. And it was bulging between 18 to 50 feet per day. What do you do if you live near a mountain like that, especially a volcano, and it is starting to bulge? You run. Get out of there, right? Yeah, that mountain's going to blow. Sure enough, May 18th, 1980, that mountain began to blow. A huge landslide occurred, and at the end, largest recorded landslide ever witnessed. Okay, and then that mountain began to blow, and you think about this mountain blowing. Wow, that was a big volcano, wasn't it? That was. Think about it. Everybody's really impressed with that volcano. Well, I give tomorrow night, I'm giving a program there at the campus church, right? Over there, and ask him where the for information on that. But anyhow, I'll be giving on a tour, a creation tour of Yellowstone National Park. You are all invited, okay? Come on to that. I love that program and that tour. But it turns out that Yellowstone was a little bigger volcano than Mount St. Helens, even though we think that's a big one. Think on the order of 10 to 3 eruptions, 10,000 times the size of Mount St. Helens. You don't want to be anywhere close when that happens, right? No, just think about that. That's with the major eruptions that they had there now, following the hotspot that goes up through there. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Well, Mount St. Helens, that was a gorgeous place to visit, but now you see a before and after. Now you see a volcanic vent coming up in the middle. It actually was a little bit of a lava flow inside of the main crater. And so we learned something from that. We learned how you can, lose a lot of mountain, but gain a lot of knowledge. So far, so good? Gain a lot of knowledge. Okay. We found out that layers like this does not take a long time to form. They don't. And in fact, I was told in geology that you can get the fine layers. It takes like annual varves. But no, these are pulsating flows of what are called pyroclastic flows. When all that ash starts coming up, it's hot. It is very hot. and then it comes down this way, and this way, cements together when it falls. That's a volcanic lava flow, okay? Pyroclastic flows. And we found out that the entire ridge you see was put down in parts of 3 days. It doesn't take long, does it? That's right, parts of 3 days. That's it. I've been at the Badlands. They tell you those kind of same layers take eons of time to form, right? Millions of years. No, you ask the ranger, sir, didn't we see the same thing happen at Mount St. Helens in 1 day as what we see here? You know what their answer you're going to get would be? Well, Mount St. Helens was a special case. Maybe that was a special case. Well, the answer there is, well, you can't get this kind, maybe so, but you can't get the kind of erosion called the Badland topography. You can't get that kind of erosion in a short period of time. Well, that isn't the case either, because Mount St. Helens had secondary steam blasts that produced steam pits across that shortest distance from, from here to here is 1/4 of a mile. That steam pit happened in parts of 1 day, 1 afternoon. That's all it took. Okay, that's a Mount St. Helens. We learned a lot back then. Look at this big canyon. Wow, it takes millions of years to make a big canyon. Well, that isn't the case at all. In fact, at Mount St. Helens, that particular canyon was formed mostly in 1 day. 1 day, catastrophic flow as a result of glaciers melting off the side of Mount St. Helens. All that water came down from the melting glacier. And if you saw the films back then, when this was occurring, it was not just water. It was mixed with volcanic ash, mixed with boulders, and you have the cement slurry traveling approximately at that point 30 miles per hour downstream. Okay. Now, when you actually look at the photos, you see an oil tanker truck floating on that whole thing. Do you understand the density? You understand how easy it is to carve out canyons with a cement flow? Very much so. All right, but the canyon goes for 8 miles back there. Most of it, the bulk of it, in 1 day. National Geographic said you would expect the Hard Rock Canyon to be thousands, even hundreds of thousands of years old, says Peter Frenzen, monument scientist. But this was cut in less than a decade, less than 10 years. And the bulk of it was 1 day. 1 day, that's all it took. Now, think about what I was talking about with the Noahic flood. The whole world is covered by water. Nothing to stop the currents. Tsunamis going, because during the flood, you're going to have a lot of tectonic activity, breaks, etc. Tsunamis produced. High velocity flows. Can you imagine what kind of erosion you can get with all that? Not just with water, but with various consistencies of cement slurries. Wow. In geology, I've come to look at petrified mud, and I have a new thing that I say is a key of geology. When you see mud, think flood. Fair enough? Okay. That's Bryce Canyon National Park. We'll look at sandstone mud. Guess what? When you see mud, think flood. We've been told those layers were put down over millions of years. No, not necessarily, if you have enough water at the time. And then how about the erosion of that canyon? The geologist ranger would say it would have taken literally millions of years to carve those canyons. But wait a minute, you go right around the corner from that and you see it's the same location. You see a canyon within a canyon. That means at one time there's a lot more water going through, getting the broader canyon, and then it began to channelize. Now you have the smaller canyon within the canyon. And by the way, I live right down into here someplace. Okay, that's my home in Grand Junction, Colorado. If you want to come visit, I'd love to take people on a tour of that particular Colorado National Monument. Or you can go on to our website and you get instructions. You can find a phone app of the tour that we put together at Alpha Mega Institute of the Colorado National Monument. We're working on Yellowstone next. In fact, I'm about a long ways away on doing that phone app for our, I'm not doing now, and I've got somebody on my board that's smart like you, and he does all of this programming, and wonderful. But it's an amazing thing with literally thousands of pictures in it, etc. All right. We almost lost Glen Canyon Dam. This is the dam that was actually on the Colorado River, backed up a lake, which is called Lake Powell. That it goes back, the lake goes back for 180 miles. That's a long ways up there, okay? There is more shoreline around that lake because of all the different canyons than we have shoreline on the Pacific coast of North America. Wow, that's a big lake, isn't it? Fun. But anyhow, but they had a major flood going on upstream that year. A lot of snow, a lot of rain, and all the different smaller dams began to discharge until Lake Powell almost overtopped. In fact, they even had to put a temporary plywood structure up on top in order to hold back all of this water. They had opened up their overflow tubes. They already had planned on potential of that happening. And they were actually letting out like 40,000 cubic feet per minute of water. That's a lot of water coming through there. But when they opened up the overflow tubes, and these tubes are tunnels that are lined with 3 foot of cement that is reinforced by rebar, steel, heavy duty. And they were watching the flow. Everything's going just as planned. They were just so happy. And then all of a sudden, one of the tubes, they noticed the water changed color from clear to sandstone color. Uh-oh. They now realize somehow or another there was a process in geology and hydrology. It is called cavitation. Same thing that makes pits on your propeller on a boat, if you have a boat. All right, they make pits on the propeller. But the cavitation there in hydrology, you can move big rocks with cavitation. Cavitation is like a vacuum bubble, and it explodes, and it causes damage. The water washes it out real quickly. Okay, so that's what this would be looking like. But the cavitation, they noticed then with the color change, they also noticed big blocks of rock and concrete being put right out of the dam. And it is working its way toward the face of the dam. When that happens, they lose the dam. Okay? They shut down that tube as quickly as they could. And they went back after the problem was solved because the other overflow tube held. This one didn't. Okay? They went back in afterwards and found out within a matter of just minutes, this cavitation had eroded through the solid sandstone, solid rock, the size of a cubic basketball court. That's pretty big. All right, it shows you what the power of water will do. If you have enough water, what you can get. All right, now let's apply some of that thinking. This is Dry Falls in Eastern Washington. Falls, yeah, a dry waterfall. What do you mean? There was a waterfall here at one time. Yeah, wait a minute, it's flat as a pancake across there from horizon to horizon. What do you mean there was a waterfall? That's what they said to J. Harlan Bretz as he was talking about this. They just laughed at him. There's no way. You're talking about a huge flood that came through here. with a big waterfall carving this out, and this being a plunge pool. He says, yeah, there's evidence all over it. They just laughed at him. For 40 years, he was publishing his data. For 40 years, they laughed at him. And finally, they took a field trip to see what he was talking about. And afterwards, they told him, we are all now catastrophists, believing in what happened in a short period of time, not slowly and gradually over a long period of time. And no, it wasn't glaciation. They were able to substantiate that. It was not glaciation. But what was the turning point? The turning point came when they actually noticed shorelines of a big lake near Missoula, Montana. This is hundreds of miles away, okay, from that dry falls. And look at the shorelines. That water depth would have been at least 900 feet above the present city of Missoula, Montana. That's a lot of water. And then they realized, oh, wait a minute, there was a glacial ice dam at one time that blocked that river. And it caused all that water to back up upstream. And then suddenly, since ice is not a good thing to build a dam out of, okay, not a good thing, all of a sudden that water broke through that ice. And that 500 cubic feet of, or cubic miles of water, 500 cubic miles of water suddenly discharged downstream, causing a waterfall from horizon to horizon. Okay. And didn't carve just one channel, carved a whole network of channels in an area of 100 miles by 200 miles. And that water just chewed everything up. And so how long did it take to carve canyons? All right, 24 to 48 hours, according to standard geology today. Well, maybe the ice came back and it happened again. That's only conjecture because there's ways of looking at it two different ways. But think about that big canyon downstream from the waterfall. It goes for 22 miles down to Soap Lake, Washington, and it's 6 miles wide and up to 900 feet deep. And now they're saying that only took 24 to 48 hours to form. Okay, you look downstream from it. This is from upriver, looking down through one or two of the channels. And there were dozens of channels going on here. Look at that. There's Dry Falls right here. All right, but wait a minute. Look at all of this evidence of major catastrophic flow. This is the canyon that was formed in 24 to 48 hours. The whole area was. Okay, let's go to another segment, another channel. You find Palouse Falls in eastern Washington. Palouse Falls. Oh, wow, look at that great waterfall. That is 180 feet tall waterfall. That's a big one. Wow, but wait a minute, there's something even more impressive when you look at it and look at the size of that plunge pool. That means there was a lot more water at one time. And you say, how much water? Look at these rolling hills here. The water was rolling over the tops of those hills. That's what made them rounded. And then not only that, put great big gravel deposits down there too, of rock that was chewed up on one side, deposited on the lee side. Okay. Then you look downstream, there's a big canyon, 1,300 feet deep, carved in basically now 24 to 48 hours. This is standard geology. This is what you see at the signposts now at these particular sites. They're on the signposts. And by the way, just for fun, how would you like to kayak that thing? Sounds pretty deadly to me. How about you? Okay. But somebody did kayak at Palouse Falls. Yeah, they videoed it and everything. He made it. He made it. Broke one paddle, and that is all. And there's a huge amount of water going through there. Okay. Crazy. The guy didn't value his life, I can tell you that. Okay, some of the evidences you see from these falls and the whole thing, look at that right there. Look at those beds. Interesting, these are layers formed from the catastrophic flow. But look at these layers, say at the Grand Canyon. They're almost identical to those particular layers, indicating they could have been put down by the same type of catastrophic flooding. They could have had, who knows? But they're similar, 300 feet of deposits there. Not only that, but you even go further downstream, you'd find boulder fields. That boulder is the size of a house, but it's sitting on top of other boulders, granite boulders, and also basalt, volcanic lava boulders. And if you drill down, go down 300 feet, you're hitting boulders all the way through it. It's a boulder pile. Okay, that's Missoula flood. Okay, some people call it the Spokane flood. Okay, but the lake was centered around Missoula, Montana. Okay, let's go to a different one. You go to Salt Lake City and you look around Salt Lake City in Utah and you see this bench. See that? That's a shoreline of an ancient lake. Now they're starting to put the two and two together and say, look at those huge boulders downstream that look like potatoes in a field in Idaho, right? But some of those potatoes are the size of that Suburban. There was at least a depth of 100 feet of water over the top of that, rolling around those boulders. You understand that? That's a lot of water. Okay, so that shoreline I'm talking about would have been of the Lake Bonneville. This is the signpost today. Okay, you can go and see that. Standard geology. That lake would have been 900 to 1,000 feet deeper than the present Great Salt Lake. And all of a sudden, well, let's think about it. That lake would have covered 1/3 the state of Utah. Utah is about the size of Minnesota, okay? 1/3 of the state. Then all of that water catastrophically drained to the north, and we can see exactly where it happened, where it went through. Part of that water went right down, carved out the Snake River Canyon. According to standard geology, this canyon was probably not there 30 days before this event. Okay, bam, there it is. Look at the huge plunge pool down here. It's amazing, isn't it? What about those boulders I'm talking about? Is this microphone all working for everybody? You're hearing me okay? Okay. The boulders are on top of that. That means the water depth was at least 100 feet deeper than that particular canyon, right? So the water is just chewing it out, making a whole series of waterfalls, just like the Missoula flood. All right. Now, a geomorphologist, somebody who studies the shapes of canyons and geological formations, basically his name is Dury. He said in all of his research, all over the world, that 95%, that's almost every one of the world's rivers and streams were much bigger in the past. They're called underfit streams today. It's saying that the channel cannot be explained through application of the current flow. It had to have been much, much larger. Okay, well, we see that not just in Missoula or Salt Lake City, Lake Bonneville. We also find in Siberia, there was a flood of water, according to the Science magazine publication, that would have been 10 times larger than the Missoula flood. That's a lot of water, right? A lot of water. Whole mountain ridges were left as ripple marks. Canyons ripped up. Siberia. Wave Rock in Australia goes for 7 miles across there. And yet not a drop goes over it today. You can imagine the water flow going over it at one time, okay? And So what I'm trying to say is time is not the hero of the plot. And in fact, lots of time will not produce the features we see with a little bit of water. What it takes is a lot of water in a short period of time. Okay, you know, Charles Darwin actually sailed along with the ship called the Beagle along the coast of South America. He saw volcanic layers and he reasoned, oh, it must have taken millions of years, he said eons, but millions of years to carve or to put down these layers. Well, guess what? We saw the very same type of layers formed at Mount St. Helens. How long do those take? Days. That's all. Same type of layers. All right. Of course, he thought what he thought was an immense period of time in with slow and gradual changes to get a theory of evolution by natural selection over millions of years. Okay. But during that particular trip, Charles Darwin also went up the Santa Cruz River. They actually took a small boat up, and sure enough, what did they find? Charles Darwin said, grain of sand by grain of sand. It must have taken eons of years for this little Santa Cruz River to cut through this big bluff here. What is this bluff? Volcanic lava. Okay, that's what it is. But you know what? He missed a few things. He missed seeing boulders the size of automobiles on the ridge over here, indicating a huge water flow at one time. He missed this particular deposit of boulders as well. All right. All right. So that's Santa Cruz River and Charles Darwin. Now, you see why I see a different picture? And now you see I wasn't tricking you? Okay, just blowing up the picture a little bit. I see a new picture than what I used to in my college days. New picture of canyon formation. All right. I go to the Canyonlands area near Grand Junction, maybe hour and a half, 2 hours away, perhaps. And I see huge evidences of major flooding. Now, from where I'm standing, taking this picture, all the way to here is 18 miles. A lot of water and a little bit of time is what probably did it. Not time. Time's not going to give you this type of erosional pattern, okay, with a little bit of water. We're looking at a massive water flow. This massive water flow will eventually end up down the Grand Canyon, okay? That's where that river will go. All right, so I see evidence of the flood wherever I look. Yeah.
Is that all mud? Did you say like what form of that?
Well, these are petrified mud, all these layers. So the layers were put down first, probably during the flood. It's the erosion that occurs in the aftermaths of the flood, or as the water is washing off the face of the earth. Okay. Remember in the Bible, it says the mountains rose up, the valley sank down. You're with me on that? Okay, water is going to be washing off during that particular time, isn't it? Sheet flow going down. It begins to channelize. Now we have great big lakes upstream begin to come crashing down through there as well. Okay, and what does that produce? Great big canyons in a very short period of time. All right. And so I see a lot of evidence for a flood, looking even at the Grand Canyon, okay? The standard interpretation, it took millions of years to put down those layers. And then it took more millions of years to carve that Grand Canyon. But what if there's a huge inland sea above the Grand Canyon? What if you had something like that? Remember those boulders I showed you? Those big boulders? Shoot, right there. Same type of rocks that you're seeing at the Grand Canyon. So all of a sudden, this now catastrophically drains. That little canyon is just no problem for that kind of water going through. Correct? Doesn't take long. You can carve that thing out in possibly weeks, not millions and millions of years, like we are told. change your perspective, see a different picture. See, perhaps that there's an Einstein picture instead of a Marilyn Monroe picture, right? Maybe possibly we. Let's look at the Black Canyon of the Gunnison. It's just a little bit south of where I live, about an hour away. Wow, look at this. If you were to go right here at this overview, take a jump, a big long jump, not recommended. It's 1,600 feet from here down to the river. How was that canyon formed? I have a theory. Okay. Substantiated partly by some geologists that took me to task on it. Okay. And my idea is that little river down there did not carve this big canyon. And in fact, there's evidence. You see it. It's well known in geology that the Gunnison River, that's in the middle of the Black Canyon of the Gunnison, actually took a route clear around, okay? Way around the whole thing. Hundreds of miles circle around it, probably. All right, but now what happens? How long does it take to make a canyon? Kids, I want you to time this. All right, let's suppose the earth, let's suppose there's a big earthquake, okay? And the earth begins to shake. And all of a sudden, you've got this layer here and it goes. Let me do it one more time. I want you to time it. A second. In a huge earthquake, you can get a canyon just like that, can't you? And now that crack captures the river. The river goes downstream now, cleaning out that crack. That's all it is. So we can talk about matter of seconds or minutes to all of a sudden begin forming that particular canyon. It makes sense, doesn't it? Okay, now let's look a little further. I'm kind of teaching you what to look for. If you go some places, travel around, I want you to think about some of the things I've been trying to teach you tonight, okay? We have the Sierra Nevada mountains, California. When I was over there, beautiful sight, right? But wait a minute, my eye caught something over here. Let's look a little closer. It caught this particular formation. Wait a minute, what is this? Wait, that looks like an island with a water flow going around it. Maybe. So what do? You hike down, you look at the bottom and you say, yeah, there's a little water going down through there. But then you look at the volcanic basalt and you say, wait a minute, there was a lot of water sculpting all of that volcanic rock. And that then substantiates that major water flow, even there. All right, now you've got the cement slurry that from a collapsing lake, and there's a bunch of them going on here now, and it's going downstream, a cement slurry. It's got to stop somewhere, all right? Lowest point in this particular area is Death Valley, California. And look at this cement dump right in here. There it is. There's the dump of material. And in fact, it carves out the canyon, even coating the canyon with cement as it carves it out. That's called Mosaic Canyon there at Death Valley, California. Okay, there it is. So it carves it out, putting a cement layer around it. And then here's the rest of the dump way down below. Fits, doesn't it? Fits. Catastrophic geology. Okay, when let's suppose a body of water like cement mixture comes barreling down. Now it hits a big lake in the middle of Death Valley. It's going to drop out the big material first, then the smaller material, and then the fine silts and clay way downstream, all the way down. And you see this now, that's the view. That's a view of what happened there. catastrophic flow, drop in the material upriver, and now Death Valley. Now there's no outlet to that, is there? So that now evaporated. But you look down in Death Valley, we see something right here. All right, see these shorelines? Those are shorelines. That means the water level was there at one time. Okay, you've got it, it's there. But notice I say the problem, wait a minute, this is not the Sahara Desert. This is Death Valley. We're going to compare the Death Valley and some of the formations there with the problems of the wet Sahara Desert. What do you mean wet Sahara Desert? How many ever heard those two words together? Wet Sahara. When you think of Sahara Desert, what do you think? Dry. Desert. You're going to die, right? That's what you think about, don't you? But guess what? Underneath the Sahara Desert, you have a lush vegetation at one time. There were rivers with crocodiles in it and sea-going fish in those rivers. That's geology knows that. Okay, in fact, here's another article, October 1, 2021. That was this month. Okay, it's called the Lush Green Sahara Desert. Woo. How could that be possible? Today, it may go a year. You don't even have a drop of rain. Drop rain. No, nothing going on there, huh? Okay, all right, now think about it. Notice the title here. Shifting boundary of the intertropical convergence zone. Michael Ord is a meteorologist, and what he says, when you look just south of the Sahara Desert, you have tropical vegetation right now. Lots and lots of rain. And so, according to the model that we can come up with, we now realize that that zone was up here where the Sahara is now, and then went down. We have the tropical zone a little further south. Okay, but it was further north. How does that fit? Okay, now I just have to tell you, how do we have so many great big inland lakes that I've been talking about, collapsing, forming these great big canyons? Well, first of all, we have to think of the flood. Now, I'm going to give you a model. I'm going to lay it out here for you, okay? All right. In the flood, let's start with, let's start in the middle of the flood, okay? Rather than what caused the flood. If you want to know about it, I've got runaway subduction models that John Baumgartner had suggested that really works well. And now we got the middle of the flood. You have all these currents going on. When you have moving currents, moving a lot of big boulders, they're crashing against each other. You're making friction even in the middle of water. You are heating that water. Now you have volcanic activity coming up during the time of the flood, as the world is covered by water. That volcanic activity is going to heat up the water as well. In fact, you look at today, the largest lava flow that we know of in the last 200 to 300 years occurred in Iceland, 1783, I think. I believe it was 218 square miles of lava flow. That's a bunch, huh? Huge. But you know what? First of all, I talked about Yellowstone, the volcanic activity going on there, up to 10,000 times Mount St. Helens. All right? They've got a crater there that's 45 miles in diameter. Yellowstone, just one of them. There's a whole series of them. All right, now, and so we had a lot more volcanism going on in the past, a lot greater thing, but we also had a lot of lava flows that were bigger too. We got 200 and some square miles in Iceland, huge. Problem? We've got the Columbia River basalts, 30 30,000 square miles. 30,000 square miles of volcanic lava flows. That's Iceland. That's in the Pacific Northwest. Go to India. You've got underwater type lava flows in the Deccan Plateau that cover 100,000 square miles. What's that going to do to a cold ocean? Going to heat it up, isn't it? So after the flood, you've got all these factors working. That's going to make a lot warmer ocean than what we have today. Are you with me so far? There's also all that water condensing by rain, maybe even a canopy model, water vapor. All that water now condenses. That forms extra heat, the heat of condensation. Okay, that if you get a steam burn, it's worse than boiling water at the same temperature. The steam is a lot worse, a lot hotter, a lot of heat being put off. Okay, now, so we have a lot more heat in the ocean. I'm not saying it's boiling, it's not, okay? But it's hotter than it is today. Now, because of the tremendous amount of heat, this is important to think about, because we're going to look at ice ages. Ice age is as a result of the warm oceans. Why? You got all these hot air masses coming off of those oceans, right? And after the flood, the mountains are rising up, the valleys are sinking down. We have a huge amounts of rain, precipitation over the continents going on, even after the flood. Even after the flood. Until all of a sudden now, the temperature of the continent is sufficiently cold, it begins to snow. Now that temperature plummets. We saw that happen in Montana one time and quite a number of years ago. The temperature from one day to the next, when the air patterns shifted, got cold by, how much was the difference from one day to the next? 100 degrees change in temperature. That was recorded. Now, we're seeing the same thing. All of a sudden, all these hot air masses coming across, jumping rain, then all of a sudden turns to snow, temperature plummets, and pretty soon, what do you have? An ice age beginning. We still have those hot air masses just coming in like crazy. Ice builds up. Very wet snow, perfect for glacial ice. Okay? Now, what's going to stop that glacier? Pretty soon, the ocean temperatures will end up being cool enough that you can't have a glacial advance anymore. Glaciers begin melting back. All right? Climate change. Do I believe in climate change? Oh, yeah. That's a lot of climate change that I'm talking about right there around the glaciation, correct? And glaciers are still melting back after the flood, still melting. Now, think about all that water in glaciers. We have glaciation 10,000 feet deep. That's how deep the ice is. 2 miles. Roughly. It's a lot of water up there, right? Now, we also have these mountains that rose up. When you raise mountains up, what else you bring with it? Huge inland seas. Now the glaciers begin to melt a little bit, quite a bit, okay? Water comes down, overtops those natural barriers of those big lakes, and now you have catastrophic drainage going downstream, forming great big canyons. You see how all that is starting to fit together in a pretty good perspective. This is what's going on during the time of the flood, okay? And the aftermath of the flood. Dr. Michael Ord, who wrote this particular article as a meteorologist, says from that model, it would only take approximately 500 years for the total advance and retreat of the glacial ice. That's all it would take. 500 years in general for most of it. Wow. But now he talks about the lush green Sahara, compares that to what happened at Death Valley, etc., when we had a lot more water on the face of the earth. Okay, so let's continue. You see, well, maybe it's a little more than an hour and 5 minutes. Okay. Okay. I'll continue. So now, so the flood responsible for putting down geologic layers by hundreds and hundreds of feet of layers, right? The flood, wait a minute, hold on. Didn't they prove those layers be millions of years old by radioactive decay dating methods? That's true, right? It's proven, right, Daryl? No, he knows better than that. He knows better than that. It turns out that the only way to know if your dating method is accurate is to date rocks of known age, see if you get good results. At Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980. That recent volcanic lava dome that built up in the interior of the crater was dated. They found the dates were minimum of 340,000 years old. That's minimum, up to 2.8 million years. Hey, something's wrong with the dating method there, right?
According to rock dating, the birth of the rock.
The what?
According to rock dating, the birth of the rock is when it solidifies.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so it's not, so what you're saying is it should be
Okay.
very young because it's solidified,
Right.
right? They know
The
date.
time t equals 0 for one of these radioactive decay dating methods is when the lava goes from liquid lava, which is almost like flowing water, to solidified volcanic lava basalt, where it turns to rock. Okay. And so that's t equals 0. So t equals 0 should be 30 years ago, 40 years now, but 30 years from the time they did the dates. Okay. But the dates they got were way, way off. Okay. Same thing occurred when they dated rocks of a recent volcano in New Zealand. And how about recent volcanic lava flows in the state of Hawaii? Okay. They knew when that flow was still liquid. When it cooled, time t equals 0 is when it cools. And they found out that must have been 3 million to 1 billion years old. Or isn't that a lot? All the way up to 1 billion. The minimum was 3 million years. Something is drastically wrong. Okay, Grand Canyon. You see the lava flow from Vulcan's throne. It actually flowed down into the canyon at one time, actually blocked the river. Made a big lake in there for a little while. But now, if you were to date this volcanic lava flow, this should be very recent, correct? Say, compared to those rock layers underneath the entire canyon. Turns out every time they've dated that particular lava flow from Vulcan's throne, they've ended up with dates at least as old and up to twice as old as the rock layers underneath the entire canyon. Something's wrong. So the thing is, if rocks of known age don't give you good results on these radioactive decay dating methods, how do you rely on them to give you accurate results on rocks of unknown age? So that's the point there. Okay, now I can go into about an hour-and-a-half lecture strictly on radioactive decay, and he's going to fall asleep, I can tell you. No, he's doing a good job staying awake here tonight. I like that. But we had these discussions about sleep earlier. But anyhow, you see why I see a different picture? Totally different picture. Now, we also see evidence of mass burial in those rock layers, even at the Grand Canyon, but this is in Texas right here. Whole clams. Well, wait a minute. A clam dies, it gets buried. Woo, the shell normally opens if it's not buried very deeply, right? Yeah. The fact that there are literally millions of these clams, all whole, didn't have a chance to open up, tell you they were buried under an awful lot of sediment very quickly. All right. That's what mass burial of clams. All right, the mass burial of Nautilites, and that was a long cigar-shaped type of fossil where probably a squid lived, okay? Basically, when you look at that right there, it's in the middle of the red wall limestone, right here, right there. Now, according to standard geology, this was put down by some kind of a calm sea. And all of this was raining down, all of the little materials was raining down over millions of years. But wait a minute, hold on. All of these nautiloids are pointing the same direction. Do you know what that means? There was a current sorting them. Hydrodynamic sorting, it's called. Oh, wow. And by the way, for you geologists that want to hear this material right here, the red wall limestone, they say, oh, it's all skeletal remains. Boy, it takes millions of years to do it. That's not true. The red wall limestone is micritic rather than skeletal. What that means is probably there as a result of precipitation of a calcium carbonate out of water. And so when you heat up water containing a lot of lime, there's a lot of calcium carbonate that would all of a sudden come out of suspension and make a layer. Now that calcium carbonate is different than, let's say, sodium chloride. The hotter you get the water for sodium chloride, the more sodium chloride will go in it. But that's not true with calcium carbonate. Okay, it's a different system. And so it tells us that there was a lot of heating of water during the time that this red wall limestone, and there was a current because of the fossils. It totally opposite what we are usually taught in geology. This is a great book. You can get this on our website. It's like taking me as a geologist and Mary Jo as a biologist to a Grand Canyon, giving you the tour. We also see mass burial of fish in Kemmerer, Wyoming. That's 360 fish on that slab, not a fin out of place. That tells me it was buried very rapidly. Little fish, 2 foot long fish. Here's a palm frond with fish on it. Palm frond is 10 feet. That's how long it is. Not one bit of decay, indicating it was buried rapidly. And you say, how rapidly? Well, that guy is eating his lunch when they both got trapped. Rapid burial. That's what we'd expect in the flood. You know, even in 2 Peter, talking about they were going on about their daily business and thinking and laughing at Noah, saying there was going to be a flood. And no, he was preaching, kind of like Parnell does, right? He was out there preaching. But then, according to the 2 Peter, sudden destruction was upon them. Boom, there it was. All right, now, mass burial of dinosaurs. There are 11 different types of dinosaurs, but there are 92 dinosaurs found there at Dinosaur National Park. That's a lot. Ripped up. That takes a major current to rip up a 70-ton dinosaur, correct? Yeah. Mass burial. Again, by the way, how long does it take to make oil? We've been taught millions of years. Here's an article that you can look up. Department of Energy's National Lab. Basically, time is not the hero of the plot there either. Crude oil, they're formed out of algae, slurry of algae. How long did that oil take to form? Less than an hour. Less than an hour. And it's very similar to the conditions that you would have during the Noahic flood. The depth of the sediment and the temperatures that are going on there. Very similar. Okay, when I look at rock layers today, I hate to tell you this, but I'm going to be starving when I get back to your place tonight. I think of rock layers, I think of pancakes, stacks of pancakes, one on top of the other. Each one of these layers being like a pancake layer, right? That's what I look at. And I could just imagine the blueberries in the pancake. Oh, man. And I can imagine the syrup running over the top. Nice butter. But now, I want you to think about this. What would you say if you represent the rock layers as pancakes, and they're supposed to represent 100 million years of history, what would you do when you find one petrified tree going, say, from this layer here, all the way up through your whole stack of pancakes? Or partway through the pancake layer? Well, now, what does that do to those millions of years of slow and gradual deposition for each of those pancake layers? It's out the window. It doesn't work, all right? Because that tree would have rotted in that period of time. Well, let's go around. There is a petrified tree going through all those layers. Those layers supposedly represented by 100 million years, but wait a minute, hold on. Here's the petrified tree right there. Here's another one right over here. There's another one over here. There's a whole bunch of them, all going through those supposed millions of years of geologic history. All right. That picture there on the left was found in National Geographic. They spotted it. They didn't know the significance of it. Okay. This particular tree did not grow there for 100 million years as the mud slowly piled up around it. Instead, what? We're looking at catastrophic burial of that tree. That's what we're looking at. Lots of water in a short period of time puts down lots of mud. Okay? Buries trees and whole. And in fact, the water actually even rips up trees, takes all the roots, breaks it off, deposits it somewhere else, right? And that's what we see. There's no root structure in those trees. All right, now, I want you to think about that in terms of the flood. You can do that, right? Now, let's go back to our pancakes. I hope you're not getting too hungry out there. It's a good thing you had something to eat just before, right? It's a good thing. But now, what would you say if the bottom pancake layer, what do you say about those millions of years of those pancakes, right? If the bottom pancake right here suddenly fluidized and went poking up through all of the other layers, poking up through there, that would mean all of these had to have been soft if that happened, right? Yeah. Okay, well, let's go to Kodachrome Basin in Utah. There you see the bottom sandstone layer. This is the park's drawing of what these things look like. Come back here. All right. And what do you see? You see all those, the bottom layer poking its way up through all of them. Now, just not one. There are 65 of those structures that are just as clear as could be. 65 of them. What does that tell me? These layers were still yet soft. Something occurred during the time of the flood, pushing down this way. And hydraulic activity, when you put force this way, things go popping up this way. So far, so good. And now we see those at Kodachrome Basin. Now, this is supposedly 30 million years of history. And now you can see some of them. Here's one of them poking way up here. See that? Poking up through the butter of the pancake layer and through supposedly 30 to 50 million years of geologic history. Here's one right here, up close. There's my van. Wow. All we see are the tops of them now, okay? And when you get to a spot, you can actually see a cross-section, you'll see something like that all the way down. There went another 30 to 50 million years. Do you realize how many millions of years that I just eliminated in this slide presentation? Actual formations. Most all of the whole geologic time frame. Whoa. The flood perhaps put all this down in a very short period of time. Okay? Didn't take millions of years at all. All right. Remember, it was a violent kind of flood worldwide. You're going to have currents at 150 miles per hour, planing off whatever is there, redepositing it. And you have areas where the old mountain range was planed off and then new sediment put on top of it. This whole layer right here is called the Great Unconformity. It's worldwide. And you see all of this stuff being transported, planing it off. Great Unconformity, planing off mountains that were there just prior to the flood. I don't think they were as high back then as they are now, okay? That's what you see. Now, it's interesting. This is called the Sawatch sandstone, okay? Sawatch. Oh, wait a minute. We find the very same pancake, however, the one layer, the same pore, is not only at Colorado Springs, where this was taken, Glen Eyrie, actually, but you find that same pancake in the bottom of the Grand Canyon called the Tafiti sandstone. You see the catastrophic nature with the big boulder in it, right? Something was going on there, depositing things real rapidly. But that whole pancake covers the top of the Grand Tetons. That's a lot, way up there, right? Goes clear across the Beartooth Mountain Range, through Canada, north of Greenland. You see how big this pancake layer is now? When you get that big of a pancake, what does that tell you? This flood is not some local flood, right? This is a worldwide flood we're looking at. We find massive limestones as well, and whole sequences of layers repeated as these floodwaters go back and forth across the world. All right. We find the Manitou Limestone. Wow, that's near Manitou in Colorado Springs area. But wait a minute, we find the same pancake called the Redwall Limestone in the Grand Canyon. That's where the Nautilites were in, right? The same pancake. It's called the Madison Limestone in many parts of Colorado and Wyoming, including Yellowstone. But it's the same pancake as Glorieta Limestone in New Mexico or Indiana Limestone. You see how broad this pancake is, okay? But it's the same pancake all the way across there. The Niobrara Formation is very important in oil exploration. And here's what you see at Glen Eyrie. It's right just west of Colorado Springs. But notice it's standing on end. That's a whole stack of pancakes standing on end. What happened? It was a flat layer at one time. Pikes Peak uplift came in, brought that standing on end now, okay? That's what happened, Pikes Peak, when it came up. But think about it. When you get to Colorado Springs, just a few miles to the east, it flattens back out and then runs clear across Kansas, all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. But it doesn't stop there. It goes all the way over much of the United States, and you also find it as the White Cliffs of Dover. All right. Okay, yeah, I know there's Spanish involved in here. You find it in Spain as well. South Africa, some people now say we found the same thing now in Australia. That's worldwide deposition. It's in Israel too, okay? So it's all over there. That's even bigger pancakes. What does that tell me? Transcontinental, transoceanic. That's a worldwide flood, not something local, correct? All right. So the most documented biblical, or at least one of the most documented biblical event, happens to be the flood. And it's supported by much archaeological evidence and a lot of geologic evidence as well, worldwide. Okay. So let me ask you this: lots of water or lots of time? I see a lot of water. I see a lot of water. That supports the reality of Noah's flood, doesn't it? Geological. I say it's not fiction, it's a reality. All right. Keep in mind, these chapters of the Bible are some of the most hotly debated. How can they be true? We can't have a flood like that. How did Noah get those stinking animals on board that little boat, right? All this kind of stuff. We hear all kinds of objections, but as a geologist, I look around, guess what I see? Evidence of that flood. all over. That tells me I can rely on that Bible. But that can make a person nervous because if the flood was genuine, you look at Peter, now he says, just like in the days of Noah, things are going to be in the end days. Things are going to go with wickedness throughout the world, right? I'm wondering when God's going to say enough is enough. And he says, okay, I'm going to destroy this world, not by flood next time, but by fire. That doesn't sound very fun. Okay. Not fun at all. So it makes me take it seriously, but it makes me think about it. When God sends a flood or any destruction in the Bible, do you realize he always gives warning? He gave warning in Noah's day. Noah preached for 100 years, roughly. It took a little over 100 years, possibly. Some say 70 years to build that particular boat. Now he had help, but 70 years. But I think the reason it took him so long, he's preaching instead of working. Okay. See, right, Parnell? Preaching instead of working. Anyhow, but what's going on here is God gives us a way to escape those judgments. He gave the ark in Noah's day. Today, the new ark is by the blood of Jesus Christ, you shall be saved. The new ark is the cross of Jesus Christ. And what happened relating to that, where Jesus Christ died for our sins, shed his blood on a cross. What geology tells me is this was a reality. It tells me, take that seriously. The time's going to come. We don't know. The time came when God closed the door in the ark. When's he going to do it? Today. When? Could be tomorrow. Yeah, could be. May not even get home tonight. We don't know. We don't know when, but be prepared. Be prepared. And so, anyhow, I just wanted you to take that seriously. That's the charge today. But lots of water or a lot of time? Pretty obvious. Lots of water. Okay. And free publication. All right. Any questions that you might have? Mary Jo's going to come up here because she might have to read the questions or not read them. Not read them. I don't have a teleprompter here. All right. There's a reason for it. I had an accident about 4 years ago. Both airbags went off and pretty much decimated a lot of my hearing. Okay. So she's going to hear for me. Go ahead. Oh, here, let's go. Let's just go back to my. Okay. Very good. Thank you. Yes.
The great non-conformity. What do you think that is?
Okay, I heard that. What do I think the great unconformity is? An unconformity, thank you. An unconformity in geology is where you have one of a potential thing. One is you have unlayered sedimentary layers on top of kind of a Precambrian gneiss and schist, kind of like a cake batter of creation week rock. So I say the rock underneath the unconformity is creation week rock. Okay? Gets planed off. Gets planed off at the beginning of the flood. Okay? And then layered rocks are put down in front of it. In the Grand Canyon, you also have some other layers that are like this, as well as unstratified or unlayered. So you have some layered here, and all of them are cut off, okay, by what's called the Great Unconformity. We call it the Great Unconformity, and it's recognized by geologists worldwide. around the world. Okay, it is. So what is it? It's a planing off of material, putting up new deposits on top of it. That's the type of the unconformity we're talking about.
Creation, maybe it's creation week rock.
Creation week rock, planed off
And then you have sedimentary layers
on top of that. That's an unconformity.
But in itself, is it sedimentary or is it not sedimentary?
The
What?
The
The
rock
income,
underneath,
the rock underneath could be either sedimentary or igneous.
It's like even in the Grand Canyon, you have the non-sedimentary rock planed off. That's the creation we take better. Then you have the sedimentary layers that would lift it up and then planed off. That means there's layered rock on top of cut off layered rock. That's called an angular unconformity, but it's still part of the Great Unconformity. Okay. So there's several types of unconformities. Those are the two main ones that I associate definitely with the flood. Okay.
So from the standpoint of a creation model, we would think that great unconformity worldwide shows the beginning of the flood worldwide.
Mhm.
Anything below that probably was pre-flood. And then you understand on top of that, you've got all these layers that are deposited of flood layers, basically,
Mhm.
many of which contain fossils. So the fossils in those flood layers, the layers that were deposited by the flood, that we think is any of the fossils within those would have been creatures that were alive on the earth at the time that the flood hit this earth.
Yeah.
So when you find fossils, instead of thinking millions and millions and millions of years, you think flood. And
Let's
destruction.
make sure these kids understand. When you see fossils, think flood.
Flood.
You got it? Okay. Doesn't always have to be, but that's probably a high percentage of the billion fossils that we have found. And literally, they have found over 1 billion fossils now.
that the idea is that the majority of those fossils were deposited in the flood.
Yep. Most all of it. What was, there was a song out there, if there really was a flood, what would you see? Billions of dead things laid down by water. Okay, buried in rock layers all over the world. What do you see?
Billions of dead things buried in rock layers, laid down by water, all over the earth.
There you go. That's what you see.
Major events that lay down fossils is, what I've heard is catastrophic aqueous sedimentation.
Has to be rapid.
Flood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Flood is what lays down deposits of fossils. So that's a major point.
Right.
A major, yes, you could have some post-flood fossilization taking place as some of these layers crashed through and so on and buried other things after the
Mhm.
flood. But seems like most of them were probably during the flood.
Way back there.
As a follow-up to that, you're talking, all those layers that we see in many of the pictures there today, with the valleys carved through the layers, is the idea that those layers were formed post-flood or during a flood or post-flood, sloshing around and accumulating on top of each other, then solidifying, and then sometime after, it seems like we're showing the ice dam breaking free and flooding the valley through these post-flood layers.
Mhm.
So most of those layers you're seeing are probably flood layers
Right.
and solidified or partially solidified by the time of at the end of the flood, and then canyons being carved, yes, by impounded waters that have come crashing through either at the end of the flood or maybe during the ice age sometime or towards the end of the ice age. Or it could be just if there's water impounded in those inland lakes that weakens those natural dams weaken, and now you see a lot of water pouring through again. So erosion, what we're seeing is layers that are laid down rapidly. And we see plenty of evidence of rapid deposition of these layers. And then rapid catastrophic erosion following that. That's pretty simplified, but if you keep that in mind when you look at rock layers,
And you have things still pushing on the continents,
yep,
pushing apart because of the flood. There's a lot of movement going on, mountains being pushed up and all that kind of good stuff. Folding mountains tightly like this. When you look at it, you say that had to still have been soft. People have said, oh, it was probably just deep and that's plastic motion. No, the evidence seems to indicate it was actually still soft when it was occurring. There is not the heat element in it in many, many places. Okay. Okay.
so, yeah.
What about all the trees and vegetation? How did they get repopulated after the flood?
How would trees get repopulated after the flood and other vegetation as well? Okay, now trees float. They will drop their seeds, won't they? And so you would have no problem with really basically reseeding, even from vegetation, I don't think.
Large mats of vegetation floating around
Oh,
during
yeah.
the flood.
Think about the
Some
whole
of it-
world being a whole lot more lush than it is today. That would be pre-flood type conditions. That gets ripped up. And now you have these huge floating mats of vegetation. And that's going to make a lot of your coal deposits, by the way. And that there's a few models in there that really show how that works. And but you have the things, these mats and the things kind of falling down, and eventually you're going to reseed that after the flood. Okay. You've got also Noah having taken food for all the animals, a lot of plant material. Okay, for a lot of animals. Now the seeds of that would also be able to be dispersed afterwards. And now it starts spreading out. Wind carries a lot of seeds, by the way. So there are certain types of pines that have two types of pine cones. Well, most pines have two types of pine cones. One is a pine cone that it opens right away every year. Okay, and now it disperses its seed. But you also have what's called a Serotoninous cone that is tightly closed. And it basically, what that is it's like a waxy coating on it. Those don't open unless they get to a certain temperature, then they open up. Okay, and can disperse the pines or the seeds. And that's why after Yellowstone fires, 1988, and again, some others in 2016, when you look up there today, it's lush forests. Why? That's only in 20, 30 years we're getting it, right? And in this case, the 2016, in 5 years, you start having lush forests. Seedlings that tall. And you say, how did that happen so quickly after the fire? It's because of this Serotoninous cones opening up at the proper time. And so we have that kind of stuff that can help repopulate forests, et cetera, just with the cones.
You'll see that if you come tomorrow night to the church, the Yellowstone. Tomorrow night, we'll be talking about Yellowstone National Park and creation evidences at Yellowstone National Park. So that's tomorrow night at Maranatha.
Daryl.
You mentioned flood beginning 600th year of Noah, second month, 17th day of the month. And we gave a list of very specific times, years, months, day of the month. Did you ever think about what was the significance of that specific, all those specific dates?
No, what do you know about that?
I always ask because I know there's information being conveyed, but I don't know what that information is.
Yeah,
Oh,
well,
I see. I
well-
don't know. I'd never thought about it actually, Daryl.
he's asking about in the biblical record, the very specific dates that are listed in there. For certain days during the flood, this happened, and then that happened, and then that happened. I think John Baumgartner used some of those in his model with the runaway subduction. And in comparing when the waters would have been coming up over the earth and so on, and calculating at what dates that whole flood would have taken place
Yeah.
on the earth. So some of the creationists have taken a look at that. To me, one way, I mean, it probably has some scientific, some clues for science. But I think the other thing it does is to let us know that this is really a historical record. It's like a ship log, like a diary that Noah kept during that time of the flood. So the specificity of it, if nothing else, gives that kind of clue that it's a historical record. You don't find that kind of specificity in things that are just myths or
You don't.
legends. You know, you'll find once upon a time in a faraway land, this thing occurred. But the biblical accounts are very, very specific. In the 600th year, like you say, in the second month, and so on. And so again, it gives you the evidence that it is a historical record.
An interesting thing that Mary Jo and I were speaking in the country of Mongolia for a full month. Okay. Several years ago, we were in that country speaking on creation right after the Iron Curtain fell. Right afterward, we were in Hungary before it fell. Okay, teaching creation. But regardless, in Mongolia, my translator, somebody came up to me and says, "Do you realize your translator, every time you use the word Bible in our presentation, he doesn't use the word Bible. He said a certain historical document says this." You know what? He's right. The biblical record is a very historical document, very accurate. And in fact, archaeologists say, some of the archaeologists says, when we do archaeology, we have a shovel in one hand and the biblical record in the other hand. That's how we find so many of those archaeological sites.
Yeah.
He's
Use it like a map.
it's like a map.
You know, a clue where to go look, and when they go and look, then dig it up. Now, there's another reason that translator used that terminology
It
was because at the time we were in Mongolia, if you talked about anything other than Buddhism in a public building, you could be fined thousands and thousands of dollars. And, you know, it was very illegal. And so by saying a historical book, he kind of got around that.
Yeah, he did.
We had one time, we had went out to a distant village when we were in Mongolia, and right at the beginning of the lecture, this was in a public building.
Public auditorium like this, big auditorium, packed.
Right at the beginning of the lecture, 3 guys came in and sat down in the front row. And I mean, if you have a stereotype in your mind of what a Mongolian communist might look like.
In
these-
trench coats.
these
and
guys
that's
look
what they
like
had
it.
on.
Now, Mongolia had just come out of communism when we were there, and yet these guys were still, you know, around. And so at the Q&A time, first thing, one of these guys raised his hands and he goes, "Can you tell us what's the difference between Buddhism and Christianity?" Well, nobody had informed us of that law at that point. Somebody had just told us, just stick to science, they told us. Well, a lot of times people will tell us that. They think they don't want the biblical content.
Because a pastor can handle that part, right?
So Dave's all ready to answer this. I mean, obviously.
Oh,
we
I
were-
was ready to go on that because I see a lot of differences between the two. And I'd love to use that as a springboard to tell people about Jesus Christ. Okay? That's what we need to know. I was ready to answer that thing, and all of a sudden I get a check in my spirit that says, don't answer that. But God, this is an opportunity here. Don't answer it. I look back in the back of the auditorium, there's a missionary that invited us. I look back at him, he's turning white going, like the fine would have been roughly, I heard, $250,000 equivalent
We'd still be
to,
there.
bring Christianity and talk Christianity against Buddhism in the public auditorium. And this is shortly after the communists were out. Now Buddhism is supposedly the official religion, okay, for those who are religious.
So
and
Dave
not
said,
atheists.
well, that's not what we're here tonight. That's a great question, but we're here to talk about science tonight.
And the missionary just went,
He said, if you want to talk about that question, come on over to the church
come down here.
afterwards and we'll be happy to talk with you about it.
And it was already a
it was-
legal church that they could go to.
But that
by
was
that
the
time.
perfect answer. But you see, Dave didn't know that at
I
the
didn't.
time, but the Spirit of God gave him that answer to say and protected us.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it was clearly a setup. They were trying to set us up.
Okay, I saw more question here. Another question.
So did you have a kind of a guess of when the ice age happened? Like, kind of in the.
Probably within a few hundred years after the flood is when the ice age began. Okay, that's where I would place it. Because of the hot oceans, very warm ocean, cooling off, it's going to take a period of time. So probably it's would have started, who knows, 100, 200 years after the flood at the furthest out, and then 500 years proceeding after that. Very likely. The book of Job is one of the oldest books of the Bible, and it talks, God is mentioning, do you know about the storehouses of ice? Okay, so there's a mention of that in one of the oldest books of the Bible, the book of Job. And so that would be another potential to try to figure that one out.
By the way, something interesting about the ice age and glaciation, and I don't know if you mentioned this, but the North Shore of Alaska was not glaciated. Why would that be? Well, it was warmer. The oceans were warmer, and so the warm ocean water moderated that.
And there's so much
And-
water up in that area, it took a while for that to finally cool down sufficiently for ice to form. Okay, so no
Also-
glaciation, North Shore of Alaska.
Also with a lot of water being contained in the ice and more water also in some of these inland lakes and so on, the sea level would have been a lot lower back then than it is now, which meant that like the Bering Strait between Asia and North America could have been a passageway for animals and people even to get from one continent to another.
If you do the mathematics, you look at the sea or the continental shelf area, and you notice one thing. That was a very broad section that was not, that even has canyons going out, meaning it was dry land back then. Okay, so that's what we're looking at. And so we had the Bering Strait, the land bridge probably was hundreds of miles wide. Okay.
Which answers some other questions, because people will ask you, well, how did the animals, if they all were on the ark, how did they get spread out all around the world? That land bridges that were there would have been a possible way for them to move around.
Yeah.
And by the way, again, when we were in Mongolia, we went to a natural history museum that had been built during the communist era. So if you remember, maybe you don't know, but Mongolia was under Russian communism for 70 years. And before that, it was a Buddhist nation. So it really had been under atheism for years and years. By the time that it was free enough that we could go in there, in the mid-90s, I think is when we were there. But anyway, in that museum, they showed the migration of the people groups coming from the area around Turkey where the ark would have landed. And the Mongolian people said that their ancestry came from that area, but that they were not Turkish people, but they were, had their ancient ancestors had come from that area. And they showed them migrating up into Mongolia and then down into Korea and down into China, some of them, and up over the Bering Strait and coming down into the Americas.
Mhm.
And it was interesting because we saw, when we were in Alaska, we worked with a lot of Native Americans, both Indians and Eskimos. And we saw a lot of similarities between the Mongolian people, the Eskimo people, and the Navajos. And in fact, a lot of times the Bureau of Indian Affairs had schools for the, mostly it was high schoolers at that point in time, boarding schools. And a lot of times the Eskimos and the Navajos had a lot in common, even in their,
Similarities in language even.
and in their cultures.
Mhm.
So it's fascinating to see that even using museums that were made during the communist era, it still is, the data, the information is fitting in with a creationist account. They didn't know that. They weren't trying to do that, but they're just trying to explain where the Mongolian people came from and then how they had spread out from there.
Yep. Unless there's another question, I only go to one person at a time. I'm kidding. Go for it.
I've been in a couple of these, I'll refer to you, Jack. I like the idea of floating vegetation. Is there any historical account of like floating islands or anything like that?
What is that?
He's wondering if there's any historical evidence of floating islands with the floating vegetation.
We have floating log jams, floating mats today in South America, Lake Tiktok or
Titicaca.
Tikdana. I don't know how you pronounce the thing. But there's great big huge mats that people live on out there on top of these mats of floating vegetation. So we see that as a modern counterpart of that today.
You see it in Mount St. Helens.
Mount St.
Spirit
Helens,
Lake.
Spirit Lake, the big log jams up there. It used to cover 1/2 almost of Spirit Lake up there. Remember where the sailboats were? After the volcanic eruption, 1/3 of that lake to 1/2 was covered by logs. And the wind would blow them all together. And now you have these logs drifting back and forth, banging against each other. Particles begin to form, etc. Finally, the trees would fall like this, and they've been ripped up. So now they have single trees. Now the mud's piling up around those trees. And what does it look like? Those trees were standing upright in those layers. That's not the case. Okay. I mean, that's what they are, but they were ripped up and buried in the volcanic muds.
Did you follow up on that?
Oh, kind of. When the Europeans came to America, there was an account of a Native American who thought that the ships were floating islands.
Oh.
And so they had the people go out and swim there and go try to find strawberries and stuff. They realized there were people on it. That's an actual historical.
I hadn't heard that account before.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah, the comment was that there are historical accounts of when the ships first came to the Americas, that some of the Native Americans thought that they were floating islands, right?
Yeah.
And so they went out there to see if they could find food on the floating islands.
Berries.
Very interesting.
Mhm.
So maybe there were floating islands even up to that point.
There could be a long time after the flood, but people would not be able to survive on that. Maybe for a little while, but were they gonna?
Not for a year.
Not for a year, not with the violence of that flood. Okay. Okay, anybody else? Then Parnell, good.
Go for it, Pranav.
Go for it, Parnell.
You think about the migration of animals after the flood. How would you explain the animals getting to different continents, starting from, say, you propose
Turkey.
as a landing place for art?
Mhm.
Obviously, how do these mammals, land animals, get to other continents?
When I was teaching calculus for biology, for biologists on the college level, we used to study population growth, okay? We used to talk about those things. I remember bringing out in my classes a certain type of almost like a lab to figure out animal migration. And one of which happened to be the Kaibab deer herd, which was introduced, the deer were introduced in on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. There's a lot of forest, a lot of ponderosa pines, and then pinyon pines, etc. And there was a big range. They introduced the deer into that, and it was interesting because the deer flourished. Wow. They really took over that range in a matter of, say, 40 years, okay? And the population, it fits a standard population rate of growth. And this is what I would show. It's kind of like an exponential increase. But what happens when you fill the range? There's not enough food, then sickness, and boom, population can almost go to extinction. Well, that's an example of what happened on the Kaibab range there, the Kaibab deer population on the south side of the Grand Canyon. And the reason why they couldn't go any further, because here you have this forest land. You go further south, you end up going into the deserts down toward Phoenix. You go down into the canyon. What do you have there? Again, you've got desert way down the bottom of that canyon. And so they're not going to survive in any great numbers whatsoever. And so the population of the Kaibab deer herd almost went to extinction, just like that. But I'm using the figures now, how fast they filled that range. We can also look at figures about how fast rabbits fill a certain area. And then a short time after that, the predators, maybe a lag by at least 1 to 2 years after the rabbits proliferate, will come the coyotes after that. Okay, so now how does that relate to animal migration? I just actually did some calculations and published it in Think and Believe, by the way. So you can actually look it up on our website, discovercreation.org, and you will see, look up animal migration, okay? Now, what I found out by using some of the figures from my studies on the South Kaibab deer herd, how long would it take to fill the earth with those animals? How long would it take for animals to migrate all the way from the Ark over this big, broad land bridges coming now into the North America area? You can get all the animal migration, you get the populations done in about 400 years. And in fact, that's a big question. Somebody asked me that last night. It's always bugged me. How do the kangaroos get to Australia? Well, with those big land bridges, the ocean way down, you can walk to Australia. And so the kangaroos hopped. That's how they got there. That what? Now, because the ocean was way down, like Mary Jo was saying, and I mentioned it earlier as well, they have all that water and ice, huge inland seas as the mountains rose up, valleys sank down, ocean levels are way, 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 way down. Okay, look at the continental shelf. Okay, it goes out for 200 miles out there, and now we've got all that water on the surface, on the continents. Ocean levels are way down. You can walk to Australia.
Or
Okay.
some of that water contained in the ice for the glaciers. And then
Yeah, like
some-
10,000 feet of ice.
Yeah.
That's a lot of water.
other,
Okay.
other water also that the contained in the rock layers themselves. So the earth has really been drying out ever since the flood.
Still drying.
So, if you take that into consideration, that may explain why we see some things that look like climate changing is we still are, this earth is still readjusting from that time of the flood.
Yep.
And we still have movement of the continents and so on.
Yep. And so does that answer your question there? So you get, but that doesn't explain how some places where you aren't going to walk to, like to possibly New Zealand, how did the Kiwi birds get there? They don't fly, but they can swim. All right, they can hand swim, but think about it. I found out, but in my research on the Kiwi bird, that they're supposed to be delicious to eat. No, they don't taste like chicken. They taste like kiwis. Okay, wonderful Kiwi birds. And if they're a delicacy, what happens? How do they get to New Zealand? How did the chickens get across the United States? How did the chickens get to Hawaii? We go to Hawaiian Islands, boy, those wild chickens run all over some of those mountainous regions. How did they get there? Well, people brought their favorite food along. They brought eggs. They wanted eggs for breakfast, right? They're going to bring those tasty kiwis on board their boats as they go explore this area. Now they're going to settle it. Just like in the American West, they had their cattle, they had their pigs, they had things like that. They brought along with them across the plains.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you understand now, how did they were brought in, they were going to be food, and now they proliferated in New Zealand. Okay, almost killed by to extinction because they were so good to eat. Okay.
By the way, there's also lots of good evidence of ancient seafaring people that were able to migrate and from one continent to another even. We saw some books that were called the Ancient Sea Kings as one.
Journals of the Ancient Sea Kings.
And then there are some maps that were purchased in China back, or I think around the time of World War II, that this gentleman was in China. He was a missionary, I believe, over there. And he went into some, used bookstores, and he found these maps. And he purchased those maps, and then he would take, when he brought them back, they started looking at these maps, and they had exploration of the west coast of the United States in there. They had the Rocky Mountains in there. And this guy's daughter, I think, or granddaughter, now has those maps. And she went and traced, the spots, the locations which were indicated on those maps. They seem to be quite accurate. The one about the ancient sea kings, they had a map of Antarctica, and people thought, oh, it looks wrong, but it was the map of Antarctica. When they found out, when they could do actual soundings and so on through the ice, they found out it was the actual continent and that was shown on the map, not
Antarctica.
the ice that we have today. So apparently these were drawn before the major ice sheets came over Antarctica. Some
Ancient
fascinating,
maps.
and I think some of that is, it's fascinating. A lot of people think that ancient peoples were really, really stupid. They hadn't advanced well, or that they were not as intelligent as we are. And I think when we look back into ancient history and what ancient peoples groups were able to do, we find that people have always been intelligent and creative.
By the way, you stick me into a environment where I don't have my laptop computer and all the niceties of today's modern life, I really am spoiled, actually. I'm gonna look like a caveman really quickly. Okay, say I already do, that's okay. But anyhow, yeah. And if I don't have my knife and rifles and whatever, wow, I'm gonna go hunting deer and whatever with sticks. You understand?
You guys
Depends
might-
on how isolated you are and what you're gonna do. So,
You might
Crim-
be able to survive a whole lot better here in Minnesota than
Yeah.
we can in western Colorado where it's all desert.
too
I mean,
much desert.
You know, there's things that grow here and God waters it from the sky. Colorado, you gotta water anything you want to grow.
Want to get back to migration. Is there a bird that adults migrate thousands of miles and then the juveniles come weeks later? And then monarch butterflies the other day.
I mentioned those, didn't I? The Arctic tern is one of them.
These things, don't they demonstrate clearly that there is imparted knowledge given to them
The
that cannot be explained by?
Yeah, I don't think a lot of the migrations that's going on with even the monarch butterfly, that it takes 2 generations to get down. And the 3rd generation, the Methuselah generation, can go all the way up. But it's not like they know the route. They don't. No, all the adult butterflies are dead. Okay. And so how do they do that? That's a hard one to explain by evolutionary standards. The Arctic tern goes all the way from within the Arctic Circle, clear down into South America. Okay. That's a lot of migration. We have the golden plover that goes all the way from Alaska, migrates to Hawaii. Good spot to go. We have Alaskans migrating to Hawaii every summer, every winter. But these are birds that do it. Okay, they migrate. And so you have to have just exactly the right calculations being done before they leave in order to have a safe arrival where they want to go. If you don't have enough food, you crash into the ocean. Okay. If you have too little, guess what? Or if you take too little food, you crash. If you take too much, you're not going to get off the ground. You have to have just the perfect balance. So all of these migrations really mean something was directing them. I think they're listening to God more than I do. Okay.
There's also
Unspoken.
migratory humans from Minnesota to Texas and Florida and and
Mexico,
Arizona
Costa
in the-
Rica.
in the wintertime, right? You know, it's interesting. This doesn't have to do with migration, but it has to do with direction finding.
Yeah.
And my sister was telling me, she works with dogs a lot. And she's got her dogs trained for smell, for one thing, where they're doing actually competitions between dogs where they have to see how fast they can discover things of particular odors. But
And go to it and
she's
find
got
it.
one little dog that little dog can find its way back to the car very, very quickly and accurately.
And most dogs can do that pretty well.
But she says this dog will, at that point, he's not going by smell at that point. She says the dog will stop. She tells it, find the car. And the dog stops and it moves its head like this, back and forth. And it's like it's taking a bearing. And once it gets the direction, just takes right off.
Straight
It's
for the car.
like it's got a GPS in its brain. And she said that they've been doing some studies on dogs that, you know, they seem to have that GPS capability in their brain, some of them at least, which is
Maybe.
fascinating.
Okay, was there another hand here too? Nope, go ahead, Parnell.
In a different direction. Can you comment on evidence for human and dinosaur interaction?
That is an hour lecture. Okay, but I'll do it in 2 minutes.
It's a quick question.
Can I comment on humans and dinosaurs? You want to do that, Mary Jo, or should I?
Well, when did the dinosaurs live? Did they live
Going
millions
straight ahead
of
here.
years ago? I mean, that's what we're told, isn't it? That's what all the books for kids, most of the books for kids, unless you get creationist books, they say that the dinosaurs evolved millions and millions of years before humans, and they became extinct before there were any humans on the earth. That's the traditional view of dinosaurs. They'll say that some of those dinosaurs actually evolved into birds. And there's some good reasons why we don't believe that. We could show you evidence that that's not the case. But are there evidences of dinosaurs and people living together? Well, biblically, you would expect some evidence, wouldn't you? Because biblically, if we accept the biblical account that God created, and it says in 6 days that he created everything that was on this earth, and then he rested on the seventh day. And so dinosaurs and people would have been created during that same creation week, probably on the very same day, the 6th day, because dinosaurs are land animals. And so you would expect to find some areas where dinosaurs and people live together. And sure enough, as we look in history and the legends and tales of the people who have lived all around the world, you find evidences all around the world of people describing creatures that sound very much like a dinosaur. Now, they may not call it dinosaur because that word really wasn't coined until the 1800s, but they called those things dragons back then. And there are many, many cultures that speak of dragons. And when they talk of these dragons, or when you see pictures and drawings of these dragons, they look very much like known dinosaur types. So we think that a lot of these legends of people seeing these dragons people were actually seeing dinosaurs. We think the dinosaurs would have lived on the earth, created at the same week as humans, and then lived on the earth and grew and multiplied and became very large. Apparently, because the climate seems to have been quite different before the flood. That's an inference from a couple of things. One is that people were able to live 900 years and more before the flood. And then after the flood, those ages went down dramatically. So that's one thing. There's also records around the earth of people seeing these creatures like dinosaurs. And if people could live long, dinosaurs, we believe, were reptiles. Reptiles will keep growing as long as they live. And so you could, if they could live as long as humans, they could get to be very, very large. With also an abundant supply of food. We think that the earth was a much more pleasant place to live before the flood as far as climate. And that again is an inference from the amount of biomass, the amount of plants and fossil creatures, fossilized plants that we find in the fossil record. So dinosaurs lived on the earth, we believe, up until the time of the flood. Now, what happened to them then is the question. Did they get on board the ark? Were they, a lot of people think, oh, they couldn't be dinosaurs on the ark, they were too big. But big dinosaurs came from eggs, size of a football, bigger, smaller, but generally that size. And so they had to go through a period of being youthful. And so we think probably that Noah would have taken 2 of each kind of dinosaur, not 2 of every species that we see today that have been discovered, but 2 of every kind on board the ark. Now, when the ark landed, we've got these 2 dinosaurs of each kind coming off of the ark. They will multiply and reproduce just like the other animals, but conditions are now very different after the flood. And so many, many creatures seem to have gone extinct after the flood, probably because the climate changed so much at that point. And so after the flood, I believe that the dinosaurs grew for some time and spread out around the world. We see evidences around the world of people talking about these dinosaur-like creatures. But there was also at that point, people, you hear the stories of the hero going out and slaying the dragon. Maybe it was a dinosaur. There's all kinds of evidences. drawings and pottery and other kinds of archaeological evidence of people and dinosaurs together that they have seen them. And then also in scripture, we read in Job about a creature called behemoth, which when you read the description, it sounds an awful lot like a dinosaur. Sometimes it's been translated and they say, well, behemoth was an elephant or a hippopotamus, but it says he moves his tail like a cedar. Well, that's not going to be a cedar tree is not like an elephant or a hippopotamus's tail. They're just very tiny, really. And so yes, there's good evidence all around the world. People reports that they've seen dinosaurs. There were reports coming back from the Congo, in the jungles of the Congo, of native tribes seeing a dinosaur-like creature. And so there were some researchers that went to try to see if they could find this creature. They supposedly got some pictures, which were not real good, and recorded the sounds of this creature, which couldn't seem to be traced to anything else. Is it real or not? I don't know. They called it Mokele Mamumbe. And when they showed pictures of various kinds of creatures to the natives that lived in that area, they got very excited and pointed to the one that looked like a small, well, like a brontosaurus or something like that, only very smaller than the big ones that we see in the museums. So good evidence that, and then we have the fossilized bones, and we have fossilized coprolite, which is dinosaur dung. We find out in Western Colorado, fossilized gizzard stones from dinosaurs that they used in their.
They actually swallowed stones, kind of like alligators do for ballast, or chickens do, or birds to grain the food that they eat. Okay, we think they're ballast stones more so, probably. It's hard telling.
They sometimes give a whole lecture on
She just gave it. I don't have to give it now.
so a lot of they've shown the artifacts, and they're available. You can go check out the artifacts online.
Right. If you go to our website, which is
Discover Creation.
discovercreation.org, I have a dinosaur lecture on that. So discovercreation.org/videos. And you can see a lot of our videos on that. Okay. And by the way, I put a couple of things up here. There's a website you can go to and find out about a monthly meeting of a Twin Cities Creation Society, Creation Science Association here in Twin Cities, okay? And they meet once a month. I just spoke there Tuesday, all right, that evening. And basically you can join that group or go to their meetings, and meets over there at Northwestern, at the one of the halls up there at Northwestern University, correct, Darren? Once a month. This particular coming month is going to be November 16, is going to be what they learned at Mount St. Helens. Don Slinger did a lot of study on Mount St. Helens and eruption.
What's the date?
The number 1, 20th century, November 16, 7:30 p.m. It's a little later. Oh yeah, that's when they do that program. 7:30 p.m., November 16. That's a Tuesday night. Okay, so that's what this one is. I also put down that coming Saturday, this Saturday.
Tomorrow.
That's tomorrow evening, 7 p.m. at Maranatha. I'll be talking about the creation tour of Yellowstone. And that's 315 10th Avenue, okay? So that's not very far away. Which direction is it, Parnell? That way, okay, good for you. I get in the city, I can't tell what direction. I need my mountains.
We just get in the car and
Yeah,
Parnell takes us
right.
where we need to go. Yeah.
You can pick up one of those flyers. I think we have them on the table yet. And I'm gonna put this flyer for the creation group over there on the table as well. Encourage people to go and join that creation group, you can learn more. Okay, oh, here you go, they're already
And then-
right there.
Our website is discovercreation.org, discovercreation.org, and we have a search engine on there that will search our site. We have hundreds of articles on that site, as well as information about Alpha Omega Institute, as well as our upcoming schedules and so on, but also lots of videos on there. And then we also have a YouTube channel that is, just look for Alpha Omega Institute. And you can find lots of different videos on there.
Any parting words there, Parnell? Well, we sure appreciate you coming.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming out, and thanks Dave and Mary Jo for an excellent presentation. And I've always been so encouraged by the material that you guys have presented. It's really helped my faith and encouraged me. When I look at the natural world now, I can see with the right glasses on, I can see God's creation and the glory of God in what He's done. You know, even it's amazing, you know, and you look at the Grand Canyon, you see something that's meant to put the fear of God in us. You know, it's like
That's
the
destruction.
flood is a reminder that that God is serious about sin, you know, and that He one time dealt with it severely. And there was corruption and violence in the earth, and he did that, and He said, "I'll never do a flood again," you know. But there will be a coming judgment in a different way, no longer by water, but everything's going to be judged again. God is going to come back and deal with the sin of mankind a final time.
What I find to be exciting is the fact that people go to the Grand Canyon and they say how beautiful it is. And it's all destruction. But it tells me God can make beauty even out of destruction.
Right.
And He does that in our hearts, doesn't He,
Yeah,
Parnell?
that's right.
In our lives.
And of course, the wrath of God was poured on Jesus Christ. So
Yeah.
we're glad for that. This is a time of grace when we can be saved. So praise God. But thank you, Dave and Mary Jo. So yeah, one more presentation tomorrow night. So you're all welcome to come back out. Recordings are online. So you can go to spiritformed with an ED at the end.com and check out these videos, these 3 that have been on campus, and tomorrow nights will be recorded as well if you can't make it to the church but want to check that out. So awesome. And feel free to hang out, check out our table, talk with us after this.
Repeat that
great.
website again, because people listening to the video later may want to know.
Spiritformed.com. Spirit formed with the ED.
I would also encourage you, take a look
There
at
you go.
2 Peter chapter 3
Yep.
in the New Testament. I know we've done a full program at the church in the past, just going through that scripture. Very important scripture passage for the times we live in, that describes scoffers coming and mocking in the last days. It says there will be scoffers and mockers coming. And they're saying, where's this Jesus? He said He's coming back. How come He's not here yet? And Peter takes people back to the reality of creation and the reality of the flood, that there truly was a judgment on sin in the past. And he uses that to say that there will be a coming judgment. But he also in that passage talks about God's patience, and that with the Lord 1 day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as 1 day, indicating God is patient. It says He's patient, not wanting any to perish, but for all to come to repentance. And so God is giving opportunity for people to repent, come to know Jesus, and give their life to Jesus. And so if you want to, I'd encourage you to read that scripture passage, but if you want to talk more about that, you can talk to us, or Parnell, or many of the people here that could help you understand that more.
Thanks, Mary Jo. I was thinking of mentioning that, but I thought I didn't have enough time to get a good brief summary. So thanks everyone for coming. God bless you. Appreciate it.
You can talk to us individually now. We'll see you. Thanks.